Hey everyone, it's Hayden Dale, joined by Brendan Patrick, and we're back for another Arsenal Pass deck tech. If you haven't checked out our last deck tech, we previewed or had a look at our Chain Classic Constructor deck that ran through the PTI event at Auckland Calling Weekend. But this time we're back with some Blitz, and Brendan's going to be talking us through the Kano deck that he's been playing in the last few weeks of Skirmishes, as well as Armory events. But Brendan, before we jump into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Kano is and the background to Kano and Blitz?
Yeah, so I think Kano's a really interesting hero just in Flesh and Blood in general. Has sort of a what I like to say asymmetric design. The arcane damage, not a lot of interaction for the opponent. They can't block in the way they're used to. They have to manage the resources differently, and you're essentially playing a totally different game than them. With the consideration that you can play both on your turn and on their turn. So Kano and Blitz is a story that started pretty soon after the format came out. Most notably Nick Holding, or the Jokai of Ethers, they call them, kind of just stuck to the deck, and then eventually, after a while, from what I understand, just kind of cracked it, and then did very very well in a side event. And I think after that, it was just the Kano was heavily picked up. We saw the Calling Blitz that came on the top eight. That was Jason Long. Back then, the deck was more OTK focused, but you have to remember that in that format, it was dominated by Drone Ira, which was a very slow deck. After that, the Ira deck started to speed up to actually combat Kano. They would put Razor Reflexes in, sometimes Sigil of Solaces. These two cards are quite hard for Kano to beat. Nowadays, we're in a even worse situation than probably back then as a Kano player. Not only does pretty much every single Ira play Razor Reflexes and play two Sigils, they also always play the Needle, and they also play leg taps. They have the leg tap line. They've got the Snapdragon Sailors, of course. No one really makes a mistake of doing Null Root 4. So the format itself is just much, much faster, which actually doesn't really favor Kano. The blue count in Ira also hasn't changed. So pretty much all negatives for Kano in terms of his evolution from Skirmish Season 0, Skirmish Season 1 to now Skirmish Season 2. I think this is the hardest, one of the hardest environments Kano's had to survive in. With that said, just talking about Skirmish Season 2, Kano, even though it got harder, the deck is still incredibly strong, right? Um, just most notably, there was some additions in Monarch. We can just talk about the two classes, right? So Shane and Prism are pretty bad matchups for Kano. It was thought at the in early days that Shane would be quite easy. The deck doesn't run a lot of blues, yada yada yada. Turns out Null Rune 3 plus Ebenfold is probably one of the hardest things you can deal with as Kano. Blocking 2 Spell Void for no resources is miserable to get through, and then when they hit you for 10 or 15 every turn, it's pretty brutal. Prism, on the other hand, Herald of Erudition, is so oppressive that you actually need to run Skullcap in that matchup. I think that we have all started doing that. If you get hit by that card, you pretty much lose the game. But yeah, I would, kind of to summarize that, I think Kano right now, despite the bad matchups, is still an incredibly strong deck. And the reason I picked the deck is I think that a lot of people talk about Kano having a skill floor, so you have to get the first 100 games of Kano in or something like that before the deck feels good. And sure, that's true. But I think that Kano's also got a very, very high skill ceiling, so that game to game, you can always be improving. And my favorite part about Kano, in that sense, is that your opponent's skill level doesn't really stop you from doing that. So if your opponent's newer to the game or something like that, you can still learn game to game and improve a lot. And that's mostly because the Kano deck is sort of a goldfish deck. You're kind of playing on your own accord. Um, and you're going to always face a challenge of your opponent just presenting way too much damage for you to deal with. And there's just so many lines to go through. So right now, the main reason I picked it is its strength and also its complexity and its ability to teach me things about the game of Flesh and Blood.
Cool. Thanks for the intro. And I mean, you spoke there, Brendan, saying, it's a little bit of a different environment for Kano, but you've still done pretty well with this deck, with that power level. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the results you've had with this deck so far in this current Blitz season?
Yeah, so in this Blitz season, I'm looking at my sheet. I have almost 200 games in that I've recorded on an Excel sheet. So in Armories, I'm at around 85 to 90% win ratio. In Skirmishes, I think it's 80%. Yeah, so 80% in Skirmishes. So I've been pretty successful on the deck so far. But Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that the Kano deck, one of the things that turned me off to it was that I felt like I could lose to anybody. Where on Ira, I really only felt like I could lose to a player of equal or more skill. On this deck, sometimes things just don't go your way. Your
Mm.
opponent has a double razor, double sigil, and you just don't have the cards, and you can lose. Um, but despite that, I have been very, very consistent on the deck throughout, the season Blitz and the season of Skirmish, and have top aided multiple skirmishes. So every single skirmish I play with this deck, I have top aided, and yeah, it's been successful. And I felt like I've, over that 100 or 200 games I talked about, of which I had already probably had a few hundred in from skirmish season one. I just feel like I've learned so much about the game, the hero, and just what Wizard can do, and really kind of just at the core, the phrase "playing to your outs" just really describes
Yeah.
Kano for me in season two.
Yeah, I was going to say I've seen you play to some pretty interesting lines in games that we've played, so that's yeah, it's been pretty awesome to see. There's 40 cards laid out here right now, which is the last list you played in the weekend at the most recent skirmish. We also do have a handful of cards that we're going to lay out after we go through this current version of the deck. You've probably played around 50 different cards, right? This is the current 40, but there's been another 10 or so cards you have played in this deck over the past few weeks. So we want to talk about those as well because one of the things you said to me, Brennan, earlier is that the list keeps evolving and changing depending on certain things. Do you want to talk about why some of those cards change? Is it meta dependent? Is it just personal choice?
Yeah, so it is somewhat meta dependent, but so my core, like kind of my core thought on this is that I actually don't think the best Kano deck is discovered yet. Um, there's a lot of kind of like standard things that you would expect to be in the deck. So at this point, we do kind of expect 18 blues, and around I think it's 18 reds as well. Yeah, just looking. So 18 reds, and usually you'll have those four yellows. But the deck list itself, it's so weird. And so let's just circle back to the meta real quick. Like I talked about, the meta has sped up so much, so you cannot OTK people. Like it just doesn't happen. Maybe if someone unknowingly plays Null Rune 4 against you, you can still do it, right? This list versus the list that actually focused on OTK, it's not different enough to where you can't change your game plan and still accomplish an OTK if your opponent wants to kind of block you out, run Null Rune 4, and do things like this. Because all you really need to do that is double blazing, and then set up that big turn. But yeah, the format has sped up a lot, and I have cut a lot of cards that you wouldn't think about cutting, specifically Lessons in Lava. That card is fantastic. It's a total win con on its own. And I'm not saying it's the correct decision to cut it, but the format was just way too fast, and the value on that was way too low for me. It seemed I could still put it back in the deck. I just know that since I've cut it, I haven't missed it. But the cards that I have put in, I've really enjoyed. So that was double red Sindering Foresight, allowing me to opt 3 and get +1 Arcane on my opponent's turn. So this also can help a lot out. Can help a lot with the pesky Spell Void helmet, so I can get those Stir Forks for now 16 instead of 14. Um, all kinds of stuff like that. And then you'll see in this deck, like it's a pretty aggressive deck. It runs the Chain Lightnings, the Tome of the Aether Winds, and the Snapbacks. I think those are going to be the standouts for kind of what makes this deck different. Also, double Aether Flare as well.
Yeah. So yeah, and Brendan, I want to get into talking about some of the card choices that you have made in this list, but maybe before we do that, you just spoke about how quick the format is and how different it is in Skirmish Season 2. What are some of the key turns look like? How many turns is the game going for that you tend to be playing, and what do those turns look like? What are your play patterns with this deck?
Yeah, so I would say in an ideal world, it goes 3 turns, 3 turn cycles for me, so that I can get that counter on my tunic. That tunic resource is actually really significant in the deck. A lot of turns you're gonna be down by that one resource that you need. But with that said, I think total turns kind of ends around 5 to 7. So it's an incredibly fast and aggressive format. But if we want to talk about play patterns, there is a combination of cards that is just going to ring a bell in everybody's mind, and that is Stir Fork. So the main thing you want to basically with this deck, what you're doing is you're poking, you're poking, you're poking, and then ideally you're just going to stir plus fork to the opponent for a damage that they cannot block with their Null Rune. So if they're on Null Rune 3, that means you got to do 14 damage. To do 14 damage, you play Serve the Aether Winds, Metacarpus Nodes, Crucible of the Eighth Wave, plus Forked Lightning. That's a very simple combo and line that's played a lot.
Yep. And when you say
That's what that. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Brendan. I just want to clarify. When you say poking, what does poking mean? What are some of the lines look like there?
Yeah, so these cards like Voltic Bolt, Aether Spindle, Sonic Boom, they pretty much exist in the deck to kind of whittle your opponent's life total down. They do start at 20. It's very hard to deal 20 damage in one turn to an opponent. You'd have to get incredibly lucky. So, sort of kind of like a lot of people actually, I just want to quickly talk about this. A lot of people understand this. So, on their first turn of the game, if they're at a relatively healthy life total, they will completely disrespect you if they can do 15 damage and present lethal. That's pretty annoying. But yeah, for poking, it's Sonic Boom, it's Voltic Bolt, it's Aether Flare, the snapbacks as well. The snapbacks, they don't do that much damage to your opponent's life total. But if you snap back off a Voltic Bolt, you're probably getting 2 cards out of hand and dealing at least 3 damage, which is really good for you because it mitigates the damage that's going to be coming back at you.
Yep. All right. Let's jump in and talk about some of these cards because there's a couple of lines here that I want to talk about that I think are super interesting that I know you like to punish people with as well. So let's start. Let's actually start with the reds. Why don't we start with the reds? So these are some of the powerful cards, obviously, that you're playing. So Aether Spindle. Anything you want to tell us about Aether Spindle in general? Obviously, you just said it's a card that helps you with that sort of poking, that whittling down of life.
Yeah, so Aether Spindle it is poking, but it has another function as well. It has an on-hit trigger that's super relevant. Aether Spindle, I'm most of the time I'm gonna play it on my turn, and we can talk and just to slightly talk about this as well. As a Kano player myself, I don't actually really play on the opponent's turn unless I have to, um, and unless they're low enough, because I prefer to tempo cards out of their hand and reduce the 4 card hands, 5 card hands I have to face. With that said, circling back to Aether Spindle, yeah, it's a poke card, but it has an on trigger hit trigger that allows me to opt. If an opponent heavily overextends into me and is not able to present lethal, and I do have like a stir in hand and an Aether Spindle, and they have no resources floating, yeah, I'm gonna Aether Spindle them for 9 and then opt 9 and then it's pretty much 100% that I kill them on the next turn because I get the 4 blues and I know the next X cards of my deck and can just tee off on them.
Yeah, you can just stack basically at that point a
Yep.
third of your deck, which is massive. So I wanted to actually, while we're talking about X-Spindle and talking about this, whittling down and poking. So say you had a hand of maybe 3 blues and an Aether Spindle. Is it pretty common that you might block with 2 blues and then on your turn use the Crucible of Aetherweave plus the Aether Spindle off the blue?
Yeah,
But
so I mean that's a pretty standard hand, right? It's the 3 blues and the Aether Spindle. Short answer is yes. Long answer is it depends how much damage they're throwing at me. Because what I would like to do is I would say in that situation, the question really is do I have an arsenal or not? If I don't have an arsenal, I'm probably going to try to keep 3 cards and then arsenal the Aether Spindle and Kano something off the top and try to take a card out of their hand. Because having an arsenal as Kano is just massive. When you don't have it, your potential damage output is so much lower. It's crazy. But yeah, I mean, typically with Aether Spindle, yeah, you would do the double block and then you would pitch come in for 5. They would block 3. They now have 3 cards in hand, have taken 2, and you get to try to fix the top 2 cards of your deck and put 2 blues on top.
cool. That's a super important nugget, I think, there that you talked about trying to have that arsenal and use the raw power of the deck. Sometimes even taking some damage to get something, maybe it's another red like a snapback or an Aether Flare into the arsenal. Why don't we talk about Aether Flare? This is a card I think is super interesting and is seen, it's been actively avoided. Sometimes it's been the hero of some Kano decks. What's your opinion on Aether Flare? And obviously you like it, it's in the deck.
Yeah, so so Aether Flare itself just like it kind of blows, in the sense that it's just going to hit your opponent for 4. Yeah, it's going to make your snapback hit for 4 as well. What Aether Flare is good for, and why I think it's good in this shell, is like I said, I don't play off the top. I don't play with no information unless I literally have to, which is I would say maybe 2% of my games. It's very very rare, but I do have double Cindering Foresight in my deck. I do have an Eye of Ophidia, so I am able to do quite a bit of digging through my deck, and because of that, Aether Flare can be really powerful, especially when an opponent overextends into you. Aether Flare into Blazing Ether, of course, is devastating, but Aether Flare into literally anything if your opponent can't block it is crazy. So I think it helps me get through some of these really fast Ira decks or some of these really fast Shane decks that want to disrespect Kano and not kind of, I guess, like not really care about what's coming back at them. It allows me to race when I have to race, I think.
Yep, can confirm. I've been on the end of some Aether Flares in some of the games we've played against Chain. It's been tough.
Yeah.
Snapback, anything you want to say about Snapback? You just talked about it a little bit there.
Yes, snapback is actually like there's something to say about it because I think that it's pretty normal to actually not include it in the list. But the reason I play Snapback is, like I said, it's not usually going to take damage. Probably, sorry, take points off your opponent's life total. But what it is going to do is if you do have a Voltic Bolt and you do follow up with Snapback, you're going to get two blues out of hand. And if you think about most of the decks you're going to face, the likelihood that they have more than two blues in hand is quite unlikely. And if they do, then the turn is probably pretty crap anyway, right? So it's really Snapback is a totally just a tempo card. That being said, if you do have Snapback and Tome of the Aetherwind, it's really common for me to go Tome of the Aetherwind +2, Snapback plus Crucible come in for 6, and it's like a pseudo Voltic Bolt at that point. So I do like it for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's most decks in this format, my experience so far of Blitz, especially in this new season of Blitz, is that decks never want to play off two cards. That's never where they want to be. So, like you say, if you're able to snap back plus a Voltic and either push that 3 damage or force them to throw another card, so they're playing off a 2 card hand, maybe 3 card with the arsenal. It's not really where any decks want to be. It leaves them exposed, like you say, on your turn, especially if you have that 5 card hand into them.
Yep.
Forked Lightning.
Yeah, I mean, nothing. I mean, we all know what Fork Lightning does. It's probably one of the strongest cards in the deck. The thing is, so like, let's just look at Fork Lightning and Stir the Aetherwind. So they go together, obviously. You want to be a lot of the times when you're closing out games, it's going to be forked for 14. And we talked about that combo already. That being said, if I do choose to Arsenal the Forked a lot, mostly because I have the Cindering Foresights, and I prefer to find Stir off the top rather than Arsenal the Stir and find the Forked off the top, if possible, because then I don't have to use my boots.
Yep.
But yeah, this not too much is interesting about the card, but this card is usually how you kill people. I would say over 50% of my games do end with Stir Forked.
Yeah, and if you draw this, just naked, so no stir in a hand, are you playing this out for 4? Or 6 off 2 cards?
Yeah, so playing it out for 4 very rarely. I actually block with this card a lot. I try not to block with it enough to the point where I have none of them in my deck, and I don't really have a way to close out the game. But yeah, coming in for 4 is very underwhelming. Coming in for 6 is good, but I mean, it takes 2 cards or it takes your tunic, and the tunic resource is really important in this match. You almost never see it twice. So that is going to be that resource gone for another 2 damage. So it depends at the life total my opponent's at. In Kano, I think it might be beyond the scope of this video, but there's a lot of life total thresholds. So points in which the opponent gets down to a certain life total, and you can kill them with certain lines or combos in the deck, where they're actually at threat to die, even if they have a million cards at hand, because you go through the null rune 3 or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Stir, with actually, sorry, Cindering Foresight. Is there anything else you want to say about Cindering Foresight? Is there any other kind of lines? You've talked about the snapback line. You've talked about the ability to get to Fork Lightning to a 16 with the Stir. Any other lines?
Yeah, so Cindering Foresight I really like. This is essentially kind of replacing Tome of Fjendal in this list. I know the Tome might replace the Chain Lightning as well, but if we're talking about a card that you pretty much exclusively want to have an arsenal. That being said, I have had it do some pretty crazy things out of hand. So the reason why Cindering Foresight is so good is that I want to be able to dig through my deck. I know that the game isn't going to take long, and I know my opponents, for the most part, are going to be presenting lethal almost every single turn. So the +1, super significant, especially on something like Forked Lightning, but also on Sonic Booms, on Aether Flares. It's really important. But what's really, really good about Forked Lightning is that we live in like a Command and Conquer format. So if someone Command and Conquers you to try to like rip away your arsenal, as Kano, it really sucks. Like especially against Ira, like it's terrible because it's for 7. So you have to block with card, tunic, or card. All of which scenarios are terrible. So if you have Fork Lightning in Arsenal and they decide to go Command and Conquer for 7, which demands cards, by the way, or it demands you to go off, and then you play Cindering Foresight out of Arsenal and burn them a bit on their turn because you're able to opt, that can significantly help you in the game, right? You can usually just take that 7. Usually the Command and Conquer it. It depends on point in the game, of course, but usually it's not for lethal, so you just take it and then just start ripping with the Cindering Foresight.
Yeah. Yeah, you take away that effect. They just come on with a 2-cost attack for 7, and they're not threatening mask.
Yeah.
Okay, so Cindering Foresight, Stir. Obviously, we know it's part of the Forked Lightning combo. You said at times though you will use it with things like an Aether Spindle. What percentage would you say you're using it with Forked Lightning versus other cards?
Well, yeah, the most ideal scenario is pretty much always with Forked Lightning. That being said, I use it with Sonic Boom, Voltic Bolt, Aether Spindle, Aether Flare, all this stuff. The thing about the Kano deck is that it's just really complicated and depends how much information I have, cards I have, and resources I have available. Like doing this on a Sonic Boom when you know the top of your deck, or you know that you need to go off the top of your deck in order to win the game, and that's your only line, can be really, really good. So actually, I would say outside of Forked Lightning, I do really like the stir with the Sonic Boom.
Yeah, definitely starting to see a theme emerge. Play to your outs. Know your outs. Play to your outs. Right.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people would be surprised when playing against me when I play Kano is that like I kind of said earlier is I almost never play with no information when I don't have to. So if my opponent even like a lot of times my opponents will go to move to end their turn when they have one card in hand. I might even have, three, four, and I'll let them, right? Because if I have the Stir Forked in hand, yeah, I could hit them for 14 on their turn, take them down to 6 or something, or I can just do it on my turn and take them down to 9 and keep my boots, which in my mind is an infinitely better scenario because the boots are super important to kill your opponent. If you don't have them, it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of rules of thumb when I first started playing Kano was if you can't kill the opponent, should you really be cracking your boots? It needs to be really significant. And in general, if you're not getting them to a break point where they can't survive, so say they have Nara in 3 and you can get them to 2, then cards like Voltic Bolt and then things like that become live. But otherwise, if you put them to, like you say, 6, how are you actually going to win the game and close it out at that point? They keep putting pressure on you.
Yeah.
Let's move through some of these other Reds, Brendan. Tome of the Aetherwind, obviously a pretty common card that we see in these lists.
Yeah, common, but I think it's actually really interesting. This was probably one of the first cards I cut, just because. So we can just say my general play pattern is poke, 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 kill you for damage that you can't block, right? And not going randomly off the top, none of this stuff. And Tome doesn't really fit too well into that game plan, actually. So I cut it for a bit, but then you add in the chain lightnings, and then you have the cindering foresights as well. Tome suddenly becomes a lot better because now you're digging through your deck, or your chain lightning is letting you cheat it out of hand. And also sometimes, right, keeping it if you do have to block with 3 cards, just drawing 2 off of that can be really good. I would say the mode in which I use draw 2 versus +2. I do +2 probably a lot more than a lot of other Kanos. I do it a lot.
Cool, that's great. Voltic Bolt, obviously we know, great card for chipping away. It just is a good return 5 for 2 that you can get to 6 with the Crucible of the Blue.
Yeah.
Yep.
Straight filler and a budget kill combo if you don't have Stir Forked. You can stir Voltic Bolt and get that bad boy up to 10.
Yep.
So if they're at 7, it's done.
Yep, I've definitely been killed by Voltic Bolt a number of times. Blazing Ether.
Blazing Ether, the best and the worst card in the deck. There's not too much to say about Blazing. Great to find off the top. This is great with Cindering Foresight, all this kind of stuff. But like one thing to talk about with Blazing Ether is when to Arsenal, when to not. Generally, it's one of my least favorable cards to Arsenal. That being said, let's say you do Stir Fork to something on your own turn, and then you can Boots Blazing. It's usually going to be around 20 damage, so it's a lot to deal with. And just having the Boots Blazing for whenever your opponent makes a silly block towards the end game or tries to overextend it to you can be a great kill combo. But Blazing, I tend to block with it quite a bit. It's one of my more blocked with Reds. They're just very important to actually be in the deck. I tried cutting them for a bit, but no, I think you need them, and they can get you out of some really bad situations. That's for sure.
I think getting you out of spots is a good call. And in terms of, you just talked about Arseling, I think probably one thing to think about on that line is, if you're under a lot of pressure, Arseling and Blazing is probably one of the worst things you can do if you're never going to be able to get it out. But if you're under less amount of pressure and there's time to maybe set something up, like you say, like that Boots on your turn, maybe there's a card that's okay to be an Arsenal. Let's talk about the yellows. So Sonic Boom, we talked about that a lot already in terms of what that does with setting up combos. Anything else you want to say about Sonic Boom?
Yes, I'm not really. Sonic Boom is kind of just my favorite card, like my favorite card in the deck. I think I really like to come in for 4, get the extra, go off the top, and even if it honestly, if it whiffs, it's kind of no big deal. But this is one of those cards that it makes Tome better, it makes Blazing. I mean, it's so good, and a lot of times you'll find the Voltic or you find the Aether Spindle. It can be really, really good. And Sonic Boom itself, if you're ever thinking as a wizard or playing against a wizard, it's how do they kill me? And you're like, okay, they can't kill me. I'm at 50. I'm at 17. I have all these cards in hand. The way they kill you is pretty much universally going to be some sort of Sonic Boom sequence, because that can be ridiculous. And Sonic Boom into Sonic Boom is obviously just
Yeah. Sonic
crazy.
Boom is, I think, a card that people misplay the most against as well, because it's very difficult to assess the situation where Sonic Boom's played and the actual threat. It's so varied.
Yeah, if your opponent knows the top of his deck, you should definitely block that Sonic Boom. I'll tell you that.
Chain Lightning, obviously a card that we don't see as much.
Yeah, this is a controversial card. This is I caught this for months and months and months. I genuinely don't really like this card most of the time, but if you're gonna play a package with Cindering Foresight, Tome of the Eighth Wind, Snapback, and Blazing Ethers, then you might as well play the Chain Lightning because it's become a lot better in those scenarios. Yeah, I mean Chain Lightning, Blazing, these kind of things they're crazy, right? So the Chain Lightning can be really, really good. It can allow you to play tomes. I mean, like I said, with the snapbacks, it's really it kind of increases in value. So while it's a controversial card, I do think that I would universally put this in ahead of Tome of Fyendal. Tome of Fyendal is in a lot of wizard decks, but I think the format is too fast for that right now.
Mhm.
And it's Tome of Fyendal really doesn't build to your core competency as like what you're trying to do.
Yep, makes sense. Probably encourages more of that playing off the top, right? Because you're just drawing cards and then probably throwing them at the top of the deck because you don't have an action point.
Yep.
All right, Brendan, 18 blues. We'll just move through the rest of this and get through to some of these other cards that you have played in the past in this list but not currently playing. Just have a quick chat about those. 18 blues here. Any of these blues that you specifically want to talk about before we move on?
Yeah, so Voltic Bolt Blue, while it's filler, Voltic Bolt Blue plus Crucible will likely take a card and leak a damage, so it's actually quite good on the offense. Um, all these others are pretty just filler, right? In terms of the spells, Reverberate can heavily punish your opponent who just doesn't want to block. The snapbacks, you can actually Arsenal Blue snapback. We saw, I think, Jason Long win a top 8 game with it. Or I think it was close to the
Winning, and
top 8
yeah.
game. Yeah, so it's a lethal card there, and then Gaze the Ages, massive upgrade in Crucible of War, so good off the top.
Yeah.
Op 2 comes back to your hand. It's such a good card. Obviously, I have Ophidia too. There's going to be 3 cards in this deck that don't block. Sitting Foresight blocks bad as well, but I have Ophidia is just such a good card in the deck. Being able to opt to on that Kano, it's so key, and really really like that card. And I think coming to the last blue here, Energy Potion is by far, without a doubt, the best card in the deck. If
Mm.
if I have an Energy Potion on the field, the things that I can do versus if I don't are just ridiculous. The times when I kill opponent, when I win games, when I never should have, is always when I have Energy Potions on the field. If I draw it, let's say I'm going second. If I, let's say I'm going first. Let's say I go first. I have a Voltic Bolt, Energy Potion, 2 blues. A lot of Kanos in their early days will probably go pitch a blue, play Voltic Bolt, come in for 6, deal 3 damage to you, maybe Kano or something. I always go Kano, get whatever I get off the top. Maybe it's nothing. Put the Energy Potion to play, put a card in Arsenal.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about this as well. If it is the first turn of the game, or something like that, if you do Kano, and that's usually the right decision is to Kano, and you do find a blue or something like that, don't play it. Because what you're going to be doing is allowing your opponent to filter blues out of their hand, unless it's a Voltic Bolt or something like that. Don't want to do that. I've made that mistake, and it's cost me before.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, Brendan, let's move on. Let's talk about some of the other cards that are the options that you've played as we wrap it up.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, and so in front of us, Brendan, we've got 11 different options here that you have played over the course of the Skirmish Season 2. Maybe just talk to us about some of these cards. I see a pretty interesting one here from Monarch and Nourishing Emptiness. Have you played that much, and what are your kind of thoughts on the one of Nourishing Emptiness and Kano Blitz?
Yeah, quite a bit actually, and I like the card. I think that most significantly in the mirror, it's freaking incredible. And most Kano decks these days actually run it. I don't. I'm experimenting with not running it, but I've probably done about 20, 30 games with it, and then like 100 without. And I think I like it without because I just really don't like whiffing in my deck. There's a lot of Kano decks floating around that play defense reactions. They play Nourishing Emptiness, and they play the Eye. So I already have the Eye in my deck, and I can whiff. I found that Nourishing Emptiness was causing me more harm than good um, when I was having it in my deck. So at this point in time, I'm not playing it. I think that this is a statement that I could make, look back on in 3 months, and it would be like it's the most categorically, objectively correct card to play, and there's no discussion about it. But right now, I'm not playing the card.
Okay. Zap and Scalding Rain?
So it's actually Zap, Scalding Rain, and Reverberate. So these all pretty much go in the same deck. The only card here I think that you can slot in without the other four is Reverberate. Reverberate can be pretty good with the tomes, with snapbacks, stuff like this. And it can also, sometimes you can reverberate out of Voltic Bolt. But there's another Kano deck that I experimented with quite a bit, which does run Reverberate, Scalding Rain, and Zap, and it actually will run 16 blues as well. The deck doesn't necessarily go off the top. It definitely does a lot more. It'll just kind of Kano off the top without a lot of information. But its main objective is actually to tempo as many cards out of the opponent's hand as possible per turn, and keep control of the game by doing that. So things like Scalding Rain and Zap, they're not at values where they're actually going to deal too much damage to your opponent's life total if they have the blues, but they're going to rip cards out of their hand. And coming in with double spelling is always a ridiculous thing for Kano to do. If you can cast 2 spells per turn, you'll pretty like if you did that consistently, you would win every single game. Like those are like your pivot turns, or when you're casting 2 spells.
Yep, and eventually you're going to rip them out of blues, right? They're going to have a hand that's got 1 blue or no blues, and you're going to go to town on them, right?
Yeah, they all go to the bottom of the deck, right? And we need to go back there.
Yeah. Right, Lessons in Lava. We kind of talked about this already, about the power of this card. How much have you played with this versus not played with it? I think you said maybe it's just a recent cut.
Yeah, very recent cut. I would say 70% with, 30% without. I love the card. I think it's so good. I also think this is one of the things I could look back on in a few months and be like, how could you ever cut Lesson in Lava? I just haven't really missed it at this point. Most of the time with Lesson in Lava, it is hitting for one. You are putting the blue Gazy Edges on top of your deck. But there is like certain combos where you can go Lesson Blazing if you have the blues in hand, which can just kill your opponent on the spot. And of course, if they're at a lower life total, let's say your Lesson does hit for 3, you can actually grab the Forked. You don't even need the Stir. Forked can come in for 8. So if your opponent's at 5 or less, and there's not going to be a sigil you're playing against, it's an easy way to just go grab a lethal card and put it on the top of your deck. Just right now, it doesn't. I don't think it kind of. I think if I had to cut one card, and ended up being Lesson in Lava.
Yep. Okay. And Tone, we talked about, you just feel that the format's too fast for Tone right now.
Yeah, I mean, good. It's really, really good when it's good. That it's just, and I generally don't play those cards, as we see with Nourishing Emptiness there on the right. But yeah, Tome can be really good against Ira, especially gaining that few extra life. Also drawing the cards, of course. But it's just like when it's not in your arsenal, it really blows in hand. Like it blocks for 2, it pitches for yellow. When it comes off the top, yeah, it's okay. Sometimes you do get to draw 2 more blues and have net 2 more resources, but that's usually not the case. It's actually statistically likely to not be the case. So yeah, this card is it just doesn't do enough for me. And I think the format is too fast to reliably try to park this in Arsenal and wait for your team to hit the 3 and get the six heal or whatever, because that almost never happens.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're never able to just take all that damage to play 6 cards at the speed of this format. And Tone really shines in a slower format where decks can't pressure you, because it's already an opportunity cost to get this in your arsenal of, if this was a defend 3, for instance, you've already effectively paid 3 life to get it into your arsenal. Then when you actually gain the life back, you're not gaining back much at all. Lastly, so I wanted to quickly just talk through some of the matchups in terms of just favorable and unfavorable. We won't go in depth about them. But before we get there, obviously we've got the pretty standard equipment layout here with the Striders, the Tunic, the Metacarpus nodes with the Crucible, of course. And you've got 2 options on the headpieces here with the Talismanic and the Arcanite. Tell us about when you're playing Arcanite, because my understanding is generally you want to play that Talismanic.
Yeah, so this is going to be a options kind of thing. Yeah, we're pretty much always playing Talismanic Lens. It's one of the best cards in the deck.
Best card in the deck.
Yeah, there's a lot of Kanos nowadays that aren't running it. They're running the Skull Cap because they're trying to slow down the format, have more control. I honestly can't fathom it without the Talismanic. Like the Talismanic Lens allows you to punish your opponent when they're trying to, disrespect what you can do off the top. And I think just Talismanic Lens is such a strong card. I up until now, like let's say the past 500 or so, or maybe 300 to 500 games of Kano, I played Talismanic Lens.
Mm-hmm.
Arcanite Skullcap exists in my sideboard because I'm testing it versus Prism. So Prism is a terrible matchup for Kano. It is absolutely miserable, bad, right? And that's because they can run Null Rune 3 plus a Spell Void item, and they can also just run Null Rune 2 plus a Spell Void item. Already a bad snare. Anybody who's running Spell Void against you, you're going to have a really tough time beating them. But Prism can also hit you for 15 consistently, and they can Herald of Erudition, dominate you, and then hit you for like just an ungodly amount. And this skull cap only exists for Herald of Erudition. Herald of Erudition versus Kano is not a fair card, and you have to just do something about it.
Yeah.
And if you get Herald of Erudition on turn 0, even, it sucks. It really sucks because usually they'll hit you for more than you can block with your hand. You also take the 2 from the dominate. But if it's like a turn 1, turn 2 kind of thing, oh god! I mean, as soon as they plop the Herald of Erudition down, you got to go. Okay, how do I deal 20 damage or something like that? Because you gotta just kill them. It's too strong. So as Kano, yeah, I'm experimenting with Skullcap versus Prism.
Cool. Yep, no, I've definitely had that gone to 4 on turn 1 with a Herald of Erudition from my Prison opponent against me on Kano. It's tough. All right, quick fire, Brendan, before we wrap it up. I'm just going to name some of the main decks and the matchups in this format. I just want, 10 seconds, good matchup, bad matchup, maybe 1 or 2 of the key cards in the matchup. So let's start with, Skirmish Season 1 champion, the deck to beat, Ira.
Traditionally 50-50. So if you're good at Kano, you'll have a favorable matchup. It's getting harder because honestly, the skill of your opponent isn't very relevant when they play Ira, and that's not because the deck is easy. It's because you're playing Kano. The faster they see 2 Razor Reflexes and the faster they see 2 Sigils, the harder the game is for you. And if you're like, a lot of people talk about sort of chipping in damage with Ira than Stir Fork. Yes, that's ideal, but the longer you draw out the game, the longer they get to dig into their deck and find those razors and those sigils, which are really hard to deal with. So it's pretty dead on even. But Kano is the controller of the match.
Sure.
I would say.
All right. There's a quick 10 seconds there, Brendan.
Yeah, you got it.
Jane?
Not favorable. Because Spell Void 2, it's terrible. It's hard. You can win, but it's hard. It's really hard.
Even full. The mirror. How do you find the mirror with the list we just looked at before?
Nourishing is really good in the mirror. The mirror itself is a pretty low skill coin flip, and it's miserable.
Okay. Bravo.
Probably favored at this point, but depends on your opponent's skill level.
All right. I think that's the sort of the big 4 or the most played at the moment.
Well, Dorinthia as well.
Dorinthia, sure. Yeah, I kind of forgot about that deck. It doesn't exist anymore, right?
I know, weird enough, but yeah, that one is favored. They have to they gotta get some pretty nutty draws to not get burned out. So I would say that one is favored.
Yeah, I'd say the important cards there are Determination and Steelblade Supremacy.
Prism, by the way, also theoretically like auto loss, but you can sometimes squeak it through.
Yeah, maybe if you're on the play and they don't have Erudition on their turn, or you probably have to put them on the play and hope they don't draw Erudition, right?
Yeah, you definitely put them on the play and hope they don't have Erudition. It's pretty unlikely Erudition with Go Agains. I think is around like 3-4%. But yeah, they always have it. So
they always have it. All right, Brendan. So that's your Kano deck tech. Thanks for taking us through it. We'll be back. We're trying to do these weekly or bi-weekly as much as possible, where we have decks and content that we want to talk about. If there's any specific decks from either the Blitz Skirmish season that you'd love us to talk about, or constructed, heroes that maybe you feel are a little bit underappreciated that we could take a look at, let us know and we'll try and take a look at it. But until then, thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thanks.